Mr. Speaker, it's simple. Massive Liberal deficits cause inflation to rise, which forces interest rate hikes and mortgage defaults. The solution is clear. Stop the deficits, which slows inflation, which prevents the interest rate hikes, and saves people's homes. This week, the Bank of Canada increased interest rates to 19 times what they were last year. Will the Prime Minister end his inflationary deficit spending and save Canadians' homes?
That's right.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Speaker, this last year, the Canadian economy has grown by 3.1%. Canadians have created close to 900,000 jobs. 2.7 million Canadians have been lifted out of poverty. 9 million Canadians are getting access to dental care. Child care costs are coming down by 50%. And guess what? Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7. We've cut taxes for small businesses. We've cut taxes for the middle class. There is definitely more work to do, but we have the tools to make life more affordable for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is cold comfort to Canadians who are skipping meals, families who are cancelling their kids' sports activities, and families who have no hope of having a summer holiday, even for a couple days of camping. And young Canadians, entire generation, have lost all hope of ever owning their own homes. But the Liberal solution is spend more and drive up prices. Budget bill after budget bill after budget bill, the Liberal Prime Minister and Finance Minister keep taking away more and more opportunities from hard-working Canadians. Will the Liberals pull back on their budget bill and replace it with one that does not throw more fuel on the inflationary fire?
That's right.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I think it is really important to talk about families because we are the party that introduced the CCB. We've lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And when parents are trying to make ends meet, one of the most important things that our government is doing is lowering the cost of childcare. I've had multiple parents complain to me over my parliamentary life about the fact that the cost of childcare was equivalent to a mortgage payment, but they don't say that anymore, and it's going to get better because we're going to continue to reduce it until it's $10 a day.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I hear from parents are parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs, working every hour of overtime they can just to put food on the table. And Mr. Speaker, rent has doubled under these Liberals. It's harder and harder for families to make ends meet at the end of each month. Conservatives have offered to stay here as long as it takes to fix the Liberal budget bill. Will the Liberals stay here, fix their bill, eliminate wasteful spending so that Canadians can finally get some relief from their inflationary crisis, or will they just go on vacation?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Speaker, unlike what the Conservatives are saying, Canada is working and Canadians are working. Canadians have created close to 900,000 jobs since the pandemic. But you know what? There was a time for the Conservatives to positively contribute their solutions to the Budget Implementation Act. That started in April. Instead of doing that, they decided to filibuster the entire thing. They sent food banks home. They sent chambers of commerce home. They didn't want to hear from Canadians on how we can make it better. So their suggestion that they're going to come back in the summer when their homework was due 2 months ago is quite hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louisa Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, let's just talk about the facts for all Canadians. After 8 years of Liberal governance with compulsive deficits and no control in spending, here's the reality. Uncontrolled deficits generate inflation. Inflation raises interest rates. High interest rates mean that people may risk losing their house. That is the reality every single day here in Canada, but especially in the months and years to come. Why is the government not doing what it did last November? That is, going back to a plan for a balanced budget. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, after inflation peaked at 8.1%, it has gone back down to 4.4%, and the Bank of Canada expects it to go down to under 3% by the end of this autumn. Mr. Speaker, Canada has had the best economic growth last year. Next year, the OECD is expecting us to have the strongest economic growth once again. Canadians should trust and can trust in the resilience of our economy. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to my colleague, the reality is that if he goes to talk to people who are about to lose their house, they will laugh in his face because they can no longer pay for their homes anymore. Is he going to buy their homes for them? If he wants to quote studies, the International Monetary Fund says that Canada is the riskiest country in the OECD when it comes to mortgage loans. The Governor of the Bank of Canada himself says that house payments could rise by 40% due to inflation. That's the reality that people experience every single day. Why does the government refuse to have a plan to balance the budget? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, as I have just said, Canada is expected to have the strongest economic growth in the OECD, in the G7 this year and next year. Mr. Speaker, one thing that my honourable colleague has not mentioned is the fact that today, there are 900,000 more Canadians that have jobs than those that have lost them during the pandemic. 128% more jobs than we had before the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, Canadians can trust in their future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, the Bank of Canada hiked interest rates. This is a direct result of the government's inflation-inducing fiscal policy driven by frivolous tax and spend policies that bankrupt Canadians. As a result, reams of struggling Canadians will default on their mortgages, putting the dreams of home ownership even further out of reach. We do have a solution. We will stop the deficits, rein in inflation, stem interest rates, and end the defaults. Mr. Speaker, are they willing to put partisanship aside, work with the opposition, and end this inflationary deficit spending?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Monsieur le Président, écoutez, j'allais répondre sur le logement, mais je dois avouer que...
I must admit on the matter that the last comment from my colleague has surprised me. If she wants to collaborate, I would invite her to stop filibustering on the budget. In a budget that seeks to give strict directives to protect Canadians when it comes to getting mortgages in exceptional circumstances. It's in Budget 2023 and they voted against, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have been extremely clear. We are willing to put party politics aside, sit down with the government and hash out a budget that will actually help Canadians instead of punishing them. Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is far too eager to ram through this legislation in this House instead of putting in the necessary work to deliver a fiscally responsible budget. Mr. Speaker, will this government accept our proposal to work together, sit down with us on this side of the House, and work in the best interests of Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know that all the students that go to summer school are the ones that don't do their homework throughout the rest of the year, and that's exactly what the Conservatives did. They spent 2 months filibustering the budget. We were talking about how we could positively contribute to solutions for affordability for Canadians, to create jobs for Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and for more than 6 weeks, the Conservatives decided to talk to themselves and send away Canadians that were coming to the table with solutions that were going to work. So for them to come up this morning and say that they want to revamp a budget over the summer, I invite them to draft it. It would be nice to have a single solution in this House from the other side.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Essex.
Speaker, this Liberal Prime Minister, along with the costly NDP coalition, have made the dream of home ownership and starting a family far out of reach for working young adults in my riding. They have done everything they were asked to do and left with only fear and tears. Yeah. Speaker, will the Prime Minister end his inflationary deficit spending and let young adults begin their lives and start a family?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, youth unemployment has gone down under our budget. We've provided more jobs through the Canada Summer Jobs programs. We're making sure that there are jobs available, whether that's on small craft harbors in Atlantic Canada, whether that's in the aerospace industry in Quebec, whether that's at car manufacturing in Ontario, on farms in the prairies, or in biotech companies in BC. We're going to make sure that there's lots of opportunities for young individuals to have high-paying, sustainable jobs in the future. That's why we're investing in this country, because we believe in the future, unlike the Conservative.
Hear, hear. Honourable Member for Essex.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Liberal NDP coalition doesn't care about the future generations, what do they say to the homeowner that can't pay their mortgage because this Liberal government overspent and caused inflation, which caused mortgage rate hikes? This Prime Minister is stripping the hopes, dreams, and house keys from the hands of Canadians. Shameful. When will he realize the pain and suffering he is causing?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister.
I think context is important. Inflation in Canada is in fact coming down. It reached a peak of 8.1%. It's now at 4.4%. It's going to go below 3% as it's projected before the end of this year. And despite the fact that it's coming down, it's already lower than what it is in the United States, what it is in the United Kingdom, what it is in Europe, and what it is in the OECD. That means that we can afford to make investments in making life more affordable. No Canadians are convinced that their lives are going to be more affordable by getting rid of dental care, getting rid of child care, eliminating the CBC, stopping to fight climate change. They have no good ideas on the other side of the House, Mr. Speaker.